So I'll pick up one of the musings or conclusions that Mr. Tinker left us with, which is you need optionality. And the optionality that I'm going to talk to you all about is energy transition offshore. A lot of what you heard today talks about how do you implement some of these projects onshore. You're going to need all of the above. And so what we're looking at here is what does energy transition look like in an offshore setting. And specifically, we have a program called ROICE that is part of UH Energy, and that stands for Repurposing Offshore Infrastructure for Clean Energy, driven by the fact that the Gulf of Mexico, even today, has about 1,500 plus platforms out there that are going to be decommissioned according to the regulations when they're done with their oil and gas life. And the idea here is, can we breathe some new life into that infrastructure for another 10 or 20 years, keep that economy going, especially for the Gulf area, by creating some new revenue streams through clean energy while we utilize those structures. And the structures specifically would be the platforms, pipelines, and maybe some of the wells if you're talking about offshore CO2 sequestration. And so that's the program that we're running. Our hope is to set up a demonstration project in the Gulf of Mexico using one of these platforms, which then allows all of you to come out and test new technologies in an offshore setting at scale. Our initial thrust is to support offshore wind or offshore wind to hydrogen, and potentially bring that hydrogen back to shore using one of the existing pipelines. But there's other options too that you can look at for clean energy. We're exploring wave energy converters, of ocean thermal energy, floating solar, offshore CO2 sequestration, etc. So if you click to the next slide. While our current work focuses on offshore Gulf of Mexico, we are looking at other areas as well. But if you look at the Gulf of Mexico, it has been an energy powerhouse for past several decades, driven by the sheer amount of oil and gas developments that it has supported, starting with the shelf and shallow water and slowly going into deeper and deeper waters. So we have a large inventory of assets that we could explore the potential to repurpose. And then you've got things like a favorable wind speed patterns, very nice and ordered pattern, including some reasonable wind speeds close to the shore. If you look at California, for example, that's not the case. You're gonna have to go deeper, further away from shore to get to reasonable wind speeds. But we're blessed with some good wind speeds close to shore, which means shallower water, and which means lower costs. And a very nice ordered bathymetry, a very nice shelf that extends out for several miles, and it takes a while before you get into some deep water. Again, that impacts the cost. So we need to leverage that infrastructure, and more importantly, the workforce. I think several of the speakers talked about how the skill sets that we have in the oil and gas industry are very transferable to the energy transition into clean energy, whether it's the geoscience skills or drilling skills for geothermal, project management. I mean, oil and gas has executed complicated projects, high dollar projects for decades now. Relatively speaking, the clean energy projects are less complex, less expensive, and we should be able to leverage that skill sets in order to be able to pull off these projects. And there's multiple options for these offshore energy technology, energy transition, as I said, and a few of them are listed there. Next slide, please. So what we've done with the ROICE program is to set up the or at least I said done, we're not done yet. We're in the process of setting up the infrastructure to evaluate these clean energy options. As initially starting off with the Gulf of Mexico, but we're looking at the potential to expand this to California. We have some joint work with Harriet Watt to evaluate this kind of repurposing in the North Sea. In initial conversations with some Brazilian professors to see if there's potential for such repurposing in the Brazilian offshore as well. So our goal is to develop that methodology and to start putting the tools together, starting with the levelized cost model. Several levelized cost models exist out there, developed by the national labs, fairly comprehensive. And similar to that, we are adding in the repurposing piece of it. We're adding in the ability to evaluate different kinds of clean energy technology. A lot of the models out there are focused on wind. This one can handle wind or wind to hydrogen, and we want to be able to extend it to include CO2 sequestration, wave energy conversion, etc. So it's a combination of different parameters that go into ultimately determining the levelized cost. And then we've used that model to generate levelized cost geospatial maps like the one you see, which is for a 435 megawatt new build hydrogen export project. So given any location in the Gulf of Mexico, we're able to generate a levelized cost model for this, which means for any asset, which is all those yellow dots on there, we're able to determine where you have favorable levelized cost optionalities and where you don't. But the bottom line is, in general, offshore is expensive. So at today's costs and today's technology, for example, levelized cost ranges anywhere from $4 to $8 for a kilogram of hydrogen. And the equivalent, thank you. The equivalent clean hydrogen, whatever color you want to associate with it, is more in the range of $1 to $2 onshore. So you're adding a fair amount of costs moving this offshore. So there's some work that needs to be done to bring these costs down. And that's a general theme running through this to say, yes, we can bring offshore into the mix. It's not a technology readiness issue. It's more an economics issue, and things need to be done to make that better. And this is a comparison right there. The top 4 bars in each of these graphs, on the left you're seeing power generation, on the right you're seeing hydrogen generation, and you see the comparison to renewable power onshore and on the bottom there. And you can see most of the offshore options are to the right of what we're looking at over here. There is a bit of an overlap, and that overlap represents shallow water locations, favorable wind speed locations, etc. But one thing we should point out is this is based on 2023 CapEx, and as costs stand today, and no incentives applied yet. So right now, just want to say as is, what does that look like? What does that comparison look like? Similarly, on the hydrogen side, you can see that equivalent onshore electrolysis, wind electrolysis, solar is more to the left. And then if you go with SMR, with carbon capture, or SMR, it's even more of a tougher competition. So you need those incentives, you need cost reductions, you need improvements in performance, greater amount of hydrogen produced per kilowatt of energy, for example, electrolyzer improvements, or greater amount of kilowatts produced per meter per second of wind speed, improved turbine designs, etc., that will help us get to. And this is an example of the kind of improvements you could see in this levelized cost with cost reductions as well as performance improvements. We just took a small 10% improvement in cost and a 10% reduction in cost and a 10% improvement in the performance, and you're able to see about 15% reduction in the levelized cost. So technology is important. We need to find ways to make electrolyzers and turbines. Turbines are the biggest cost element there. So if we can bring those costs down, the general feeling is that costs of turbines today are more supply chain issues rather than actual material, mostly because a lot of the components are not manufactured in the US, cable costs for cables, for example, or the turbines themselves. So when all of that starts to scale up with the East Coast wind projects that are being implemented right now, and a greater amount of wind projects onshore as well, some of those costs are bound to come down. And similarly with electrolyzers as well. We've seen that kind of significant reduction on the solar panel side, and you could expect similar cost reductions happening for wind turbines and electrolyzers as well. But we need all of those. And we need better incentives to be able to make this competitive if you want offshore energy transition to add to the optionality that Mr. Tinker talked about in his previous talk. So what are the keys to profitability of these ROIS projects? We need improved energy output from performance and technology improvements. We need an optimal combination of clean energy options. One of the things we're going to look at in this project is to say, maybe it isn't just one technology out there on a platform, it's a combination of technologies that will give you a profitable option that will let industry come in and start developing these. We're finding that scale is important. The larger the project, I mean, again, you all have heard of economies of scale. The larger the project, the better the economics. However, if you're going to be placing these projects on offshore platforms, your footprint limited. So you have to make sure that you maximize the size of project that you can put on any given platform. And that's some of the work that we're doing as part of the project. Hydrogen takes up a lot more space. A power export project doesn't require as much equipment to be placed on those platforms, so you can increase the size of the project. We need this green premiums and offtake incentives. We've taken a look at modeling the impact of the PTC, ITC credits, as well as 45V credits. And yes, definitely it helps. In fact, it's needed. But it's not sufficient at this point, today's cost, to make it competitive with onshore alternatives. So we're looking at potential ways of identifying the kind of incentives that are needed and coming up with practical ways. For example, using clean energy projects like this to incentivize decommissioning of these assets and allowing for a proper transition from oil and gas over to clean energy, and adding some incentives for that kind of transition. And then we need CapEx reductions. You need anywhere from 30 to 50% of CapEx reduction from today's CapEx, which is a big ask, but it has happened in other industries over time as industries develop and the volume of the installations increase. Low-cost loans. The CapEx required for these projects can be quite significant, and so to be able to borrow that kind of money at low-cost loans is another way of helping the profitability of these projects. So that's what I had. The bottom line being, you need a little bit of all of the above, and we're looking to see if repurposing and a combination of clean energy options helps us put together a viable alternative. And I'm here to say, as of now, we haven't found a solution. We'll keep working it, and we'll look for the right combination of technologies, incentives, and other optionalities to try and make some of these projects more profitable and add to the energy transition mix.
Thanks, Tom. We can open it up for some questions.
Yes, sir. At this point in time, we're not, so that's part of the mix that we're looking at. For example, can hydrogen as a battery to solve the intermittency problem for wind power export. Then hydrogen storage and fuel cells, et cetera, are an option. And so we're going to start adding those options into our model here. Otherwise, the point right now is assume that you can send intermittent hydrogen, and then there's line packing in the pipeline that you could use as storage as well. So those are the assumptions we're making at this point. We have not included storage as such. More cost, more footprint, so you have to factor that into. Yes, yeah, yeah.